It's good to see you all here. My name is Tish Hayes. I'm the Information Librarian here at Marin Valley Community College, and one of the organizers of the summit. And on behalf of the entire summit committee, I want to welcome you to the 17th annual Information Literacy Summit. We've been doing this for 17 years, and to be honest, I'm a little overwhelmed this year, but in the best way possible. Hosting Char as our keynote is an information literacy dream come true, and I cannot get over the extraordinary lineup of breakout sessions that we have for you today. It's just an amazing collection of really talented, incredible librarians sharing their work and their time with us. Shout out to all of you. You are amazing, and I'm inspired by that work every single day. So before we get to the programming, the keynote, all of our breakout sessions, I do want to give you a few of the logistics of the day so that you feel comfortable for the rest of our time together. I think a lot of you may have gotten an email with some of the logistics, so I'll just be referencing some of those points. I know everyone is always looking for the bathrooms when they first get here, so those are critical. When you walked in to the registration table, to your left, you'll find a men's, women's, and then around the corner, a gender-inclusive bathroom. On the second floor, which is where most of our breakout sessions happen, there is a men's and women's room in the opposite hallway. There are stairs and an elevator up to that second floor, right next to the registration tables. Everyone who works at Marin Valley has a little Ask Me ribbon, this pink little ribbon. So if anything comes up throughout the day, if you have questions about the food or where something is, or just need an accommodation that we haven't thought of, please just grab one of us and let us know. We are happy to help and make your time here as comfortable as possible. So after the keynote this morning, we do have a round of breakout sessions. Room numbers are all detailed in your program. And again, if you need directions to one of those, please let us know. For lunch, we'll be returning to these rooms to eat together. You'll pick up a box sandwich or salad outside of this room and just bring that in here. We have cookies and sodas and fruit for dessert, so please grab a lot of that. We'll have snacks throughout the day that you can grab either upstairs at a table or outside of Room 1, which is this room over here. And I also want to draw your attention to the feedback surveys that are in your programs. They're the blue sheet of paper. Before you leave today, if you could just take a few minutes and fill that up for us. It's super helpful in our planning for next year to hear about what worked for you, what didn't, and suggestions for the future. All right. I think that covers everything. Thanks again for coming today. Really looking forward to the rest of the day with you. And I'd like to bring up Susan Miller, one of our summit committee, to introduce Char.
It is my pleasure to introduce Char, today's keynote speaker. Char is the Associate Dean of the University Library at California State University, San Marcos, and also a faculty member of the ECR Information Literacy Immersion Institute. Char's many publications include the book Reflective Teaching, Effective Learning, Instructional Literacy for Library Educators, which won the 2012 Eileen F. Rockman Publication of the Year Award. In its pages, Char provides us with strategies for building personal instructional literacy, or as Char defines it, the combination of skills and knowledge that facilitates effective, self-aware, and learner-focused educational practice. For all of us who love teaching and learning and strive to improve our teaching each time we are in the classroom, this book is just what we need. Char's work helps us realize so many exciting things about teaching. That teaching is individualized, and we each have the power to create and change our own approach. That flexible instructional design gives us a strategy for creating reflective and outcomes-focused instruction. And that reflective practice helps us foster more positive learning environments and higher student achievement. Char, thank you for continuing to inspire us as teachers and for providing our keynote address today.
Good morning. Can everyone hear me? Lavalier? Good morning. Better. Come on. Excellent. Okay. Thank you so much, Susan, for that wonderful introduction. That was actually like an introduction that was some thought put into it. It wasn't just my bio read out, which I really love and I respect, so I appreciate that. Kind of reminded me what I'm supposed to say up here. So that's really good. All right, so the title of my presentation is Creative Reflection, the Critical Practice of Stepping Back. And my Twitter handle, even though I'm not super active on Twitter, is Char Booth. If you'd like to give any feedback over the course of the presentation, thoughts on what you're hearing, connections to your own practice, please feel free to holler. Also, the slides are already up on SlideShare. If you're having trouble reading it, if you want to go back to it, it's just slideshare.net/charbooth. Because I was raised in Texas, I'd like to take a moment to mind my manners and say thank you so much to the organizing committee, to Tish, to Troy, to Susan, to everyone who worked to make this conference possible. I know it's a lot of work. It takes a great deal of effort, and it's just something that I'm really profoundly grateful for. I'm also really thankful for all of you to coming to this event, to engage in community of practice with one another. Pedagogy is hard. Teaching is very difficult. And one of the things that makes it more palatable and more creative and more actionable is to be in rooms like this with your colleagues who are going through the same struggles and grappling with the same ideas as you are. Okay, so take advantage of each other, not in kind of a negative way, but in a very positive way. Take advantage of each other. So again, just gratitude to be at the 17th annual, which is a lot of years, by the way, Information Literacy Summit here. I know we have a lot of people from the state, also people who are coming from out of state, which I think is awesome. That kind of points to the quality of the conference and the quality of all the breakout sessions that'll be happening later today. So you got my mug shot up there. I don't know what I was thinking. It's actually my passport photo. I don't know. Should get a better picture. I just got this haircut, the old ones don't make sense anymore. So I wanted to begin with a reflection on the three core tenets of what this conference is about: curiosity, creativity, and action. And what I hope to do over the course of the next hour plus or so, and thank you for an hour plus, by the way, because I can talk, like I can really run on, is to touch on each of these in ways that kind of harken back to the way that I've oriented myself towards my own pedagogical practice over the course of my career, in ways that I hope that resonate with you and give you some ideas for practical applications as well as kind of thought material to grapple with over the course of the day and then as you move forward and you find yourselves in your physical and digital classrooms. I want to call to action too. I want to focus on this idea of active teaching, activity in our own practice, and also the fact that in the current climate, in the current political climate, in the current social and cultural climate, it is incumbent upon each of us to take practical action to enable enriched, truthful, and culturally sensitive discourse. And as teachers, we have the ability to do this. And I think that each of our individual actions is how we end up bringing creativity in this process of critical reflection. And one of the things I wanted to, before I really dig into the meat of my presentation, is to thank the organizing committee for helping me donate the speaking fee for this presentation to a really worthy organization. I'm privileged enough in my life and in my career to be in a point where I can donate the proceeds of this kind of labor to organizations that I believe in. And for this presentation, I wanted to align the donation. I'm sorry, oh hi, y'all are over there too. Hi, I promise I'll look in this direction from time to time. Hi. I wanted to donate the proceeds of this presentation to something that I thought was aligned with the conference theme, the Southern Poverty and Law Center. How many people know of this organization? Yeah, that's a room full of librarians. That's what I like to see. SPLC is a wonderful, wonderful operation. They do a lot of really critical work around civil rights and social justice. And so one of the programs that the SPLC does that I wanted to draw your attention to is the Teaching Tolerance Project. And this is like a lesser known aspect of SPLC, but I think one of their most critical areas of practice. So the Teaching Tolerance Project is wonderful, and they say that they're dedicated to reducing prejudice improving intergroup relations, and supporting equitable school experiences for our nation's children. And it's focused on K through 12, but the materials that the Teaching Tolerance Project produces are absolutely applicable to what all of y'all are doing in higher education classrooms and community college classrooms, and I think we do have a few K through 12 educators in the group. So they have a series of social justice standards that are defined that I encourage everyone in the room to check out. And these standards are a really beautiful thing. This kind of is something that you can dovetail with the ACRL framework to give you a really excellent foundation for critical practice in the classroom. And these are full course materials, these are full lesson plans, these are full reflective practice materials that any educator can use to kind of critically question their own practice and lead their students through a process of critical questioning, which we all know is one of the central motivating functions of information literacy, to question our own identities and the identities of others and how we bring cultural competence and awareness to those identities. They also have diversity anchor standards that help us reflect on our own positionality and identities as human beings and the way that we relate to one another. Justice anchor standards, my personal favorite. These are wonderful classroom practices and thought pieces that help us reduce inequities as educators and as learners. And finally, action anchor standards. Again, one of the reasons why I wanted to donate to SPLC on behalf of this conference is to really try to engage and empower us to think about the action that we can bring to our classrooms and the critical importance of thinking of ourselves as actors in a social justice standpoint. Back to the content of my presentation. One of the great things about the Teaching Tolerance Project is that they really encourage every individual educator to do this process of reflective action. And one of the ways that they do this is to call out the importance of metaphors. Metaphors in your teaching practice, metaphors in your professional practice. How would you describe your classroom? What kind of classroom do you want to embody? I've been through a professional transition in recent years. Some of you might have heard my title, Associate Dean of the Library at Cal State San Marcos. And as I kind of transition into more of a focus on pedagogy, teaching, and learning in this presentation, I wanted to reflect on my own current metaphor in my administrative work and kind of wrap that back around to the content of this idea of creative reflection in teaching and learning. So this is a picture of my library. It's kind of giant and new and awesome, which is a really big benefit to working at Cal State San Marcos. We're one of the 23 schools in the Cal State system, and we educate over 500,000 students simultaneously, which is really incredible. Our students are very challenged as they go through the process of learning and as they go through the process of earning their degrees. We've got 50% Pell Grant recipients. We're a Hispanic serving institution. 40% of our students or more come from underrepresented minority backgrounds. And get this is an amazing statistic. Over 50% of our graduates are first in their families to earn a college degree. And that is an incredible statistic. And along with each of these numbers goes a series of really incredible challenges and roadblocks to higher education that motivates our library to manifest its own metaphor of being an institutional ally to our students, okay? Library as ally is something I want to encourage everyone in the room to think about and reflect on critically. What are you doing in your classroom, in your own practice as an educator, and what is your library doing writ large from the highest possible perspective to manifest this idea of being an ally to your students? So here's a picture of a really representative group of our students, and I'm smiling because this was an amazing experience. I was asked to give the keynote at a social justice summit that my school organizes every year. It's about a 3-day intensive training for students who want to become more skilled in actually, advocating for and manifesting social change in organization. So I put this picture up to really put a human face on what I'm talking about. In terms of library as ally, you have to be able to think of each of these people as individuals, see their challenges, see the roadblocks that they're going through in order to be able to craft a library that embodies principles of allyship and be able to craft lessons and pedagogical practice that manifests this idea of allyship as well. So back to the challenges that our students are facing. 25% of these students, as we know from our own institutional statistics and broader national statistics from the United States, 25% of them are likely to drop out by the end of their second year based on a number of basic life challenges that they're facing. The CSU system has a really fabulous project called Meeting Students' Basic Needs. And I think this is emblematic of a growing trend in higher education to dig below the educational kind of like overlay that we're doing. Yes, we are educators, we are helping people go through the process of getting degrees, but we have to understand the full person that is undergoing these experiences. And this Basic Needs project seeks to investigate what are the basic life challenges that our students are facing as they go through the course of their degrees. And some of the statistics that we found that I just want people to think about and internalize are that, and this is not specific only to California by any means, this is going to scale to many of your institutions, whether or not this high of a percentage of your students, but I can guarantee you that there's a lot of people struggling very, very hard in your classrooms. 41% of our students at CSU reported food insecurity on a regular basis. That's 4 times above the national average. 11% of our students reported homelessness in the last year or housing insecurity. So often we get wrapped up in our own experience in the classroom. We think only of ourselves, and this is very understandable because, again, teaching is hard. It's all-encompassing. It takes our whole minds, our whole bodies, and our whole hearts, but that's not the important thing about teaching. The important thing about teaching is recognizing this basic humanity among our students and trying to understand what we can do to help impact their basic situations. So, back to the metaphor of library as ally. And again, I begin this talking about my own current practice, my own current work as an administrator in order to kind of bring us back and tie us back to the idea of teaching on the ground and practice and what that looks like as a reflective educator. So I'm talking right now about being a reflective administrator, and that can actually happen, I promise you. We're not all fiends and monsters, really, I hope. So at my school, one of the things that we're doing to investigate this question of basic needs and basic student challenges is to, and this is a hat tip to my colleague Carmen Mitchell, use the Textbook Broke campaign to kind of investigate what we can do to maybe make course materials a little bit more affordable to students. And we did this thing where we put these big whiteboards up at the entrance to our entrances to our library and said, what would you be able to afford if you didn't have to buy your textbooks? We got like hundreds of answers, which was really amazing response. And when we kind of aggregated them all and counted them up and coded them, we found something really disturbing. We thought we would get lots of jokey answers and maybe some not so inappropriate or not so appropriate answers, and we did, which is cool. But what we also saw was a reflection of those basic needs statistics. I would be able to buy more food. I would be able to get some new teeth. Lots of dental work not being done because students are trying to afford their textbooks. Rent, a life, gas, basic needs. Similarly, my colleague Jill Waite, who's a sociology professor at CSU San Marcos, did this activity that was very revealing. In one of her sophomore classes, sociology classes, she asked students to articulate the 3 top barriers to their academic success. And we see, again, this reflection of students are grappling with the most core human challenges. They are not just learners, they are people who are striving to get past some of the biggest hurdles you can possibly imagine. I was homeless for part of the year. I lacked transportation. I have family obligations that sometimes make me miss class. I have stress in allocating finances to pay for school. And this last one, I think, is the most emblematic and something that we all should be thinking about as we teach. And this goes back to that critical piece of reflective practice and the importance of imagining the role and the activity of social justice in the classroom. These barriers are culture, race, and economic background. At my library, I want to call out some of the things we're doing to be an ally to our students. Our Refresh Strategic Plan, which is about a 5-year plan, manifests these ideas of economic justice and social justice. And this permeates every piece of our institution, from the classroom to the way that we collect, to the ways that we pay and honor our employees. One of the proudest things that I've done as an administrator is to change, like, through this process of like massive annoyance of our human resources department. Like, I'm really persistent, is to be able to actually give our student employees raises and change the way that we compensate them. That before you could only give a student employee a raise after they worked like 5 million hours or something like that. And I was like, that's not fair. So I annoyed them and bothered them and kind of was on their heels enough that they changed the whole compensation structure for student employees across the university. And that means that we can now do kind of a progressive, equitable raise project. And that's amazing. And that's being an ally to our students who do so much of the work in our library and mean so much to what we do. I mentioned also affordable learning materials programs, and this is something that teaching librarians have a huge amount of agency in, working with faculty to kind of foster this idea of cost-neutral course materials. We have so many resources at our disposal in libraries, and a lot of times teaching faculty of record in classes simply do not realize what's available. And if you don't have a specific program around affordable learning materials at your universities, at your institutions, I would encourage you as librarian educators to bring this to the fore and advocate for establishing a similar program. At CSUSM in the last several years, we've saved our students over $2.5 million, which is incredible. We also get tricky and figure out how to do things like rent textbooks and check them out on reserve. And I know I'm being recorded, and I'm totally okay with that. And they circulate like wildfire. Consider this. I know this is not necessarily direct application of pedagogy, but the more students have access to the actual course materials that they need, the more engaged they will be in your classrooms, and the more able they will be to persist and sustain over the course of their careers. A couple of other things we're doing before I move on to the core crux of my presentation, which is reflective practice and pedagogy. We demolished our fines and fees structure. Here's another thing that you can do to kind of make learning more feasible for your students is really look at how much you're actually earning from fees and how much time that you're giving back and processing those fees. I'm going to guarantee you that it evens out and it's not worth doing. So now we only charge for replacement costs at my university. Like many other libraries, we established a 24/5 study area, which is amazing, and this was student funded through a fee referendum, which I really love and I think is emblematic of kind of the mutual support that we get from our institution's learners. But what we do in this space is actually take donations from our campus food pantry and make snacks available overnight. And a lot of the students that use our space actually don't have anywhere to go. Like we've done the research and we're finding that this is the case. We also are making sure that we have gender-inclusive restroom facilities available, and thanks also to the conference organizers for having that awesomeness. It's really quality and excellent. Making sure that we've got enough reserved seating for students with disabilities. And here's something really important for teaching librarians to think about. Culturally sensitive, culturally relevant exhibits that reflect back the identities of underrepresented minorities in your classrooms and in your schools. So often, all that students see are not themselves. They see the dominant paradigm on the walls. They see the dominant paradigm in the portraits of the founding fathers always in our institutions. And libraries have the power, and teaching librarians have the power to make sure that we're representing people who need most to be represented. Selecting common read books that are critical and challenging and foster very important and difficult conversations in the classrooms, the kinds of conversations that those social justice standards I mentioned earlier can help you have with grace and with civility and with respect. And coming up with programming to accompany these common reads, such as an event we recently had where we had Alicia Garza from Black Lives Matter out to talk about the importance of direct activism to reduce racism and confront other isms like homophobia, classism, sexism. And finally, last example from my own current practice before I transition into talking about teaching and learning more specifically. Thinking about how we hire. Who are we hiring? And who do the people that we hire into our institutions serve? We're recruiting the first bilingual librarian or bilingual faculty member literally in the history of our 25-year-old university right now. And this is something that it takes a lot of work to make happen due to various different hiring practices and kind of strictures around that. But what this person will be able to do is over and above what we were able to do for our community and our students at this point. So, that very long introduction is meant to say, what is the point of all this work that we're doing? How are we manifesting in our practices as librarians, in our practice as teaching librarians? What is the point of the work that we're doing? Can we really ask this question and answer it in a way that we respect of ourselves? So over the course of the day, over the course of the rest of the hour, I want you to be reflecting on this. And this is not a dismal, dirgy question. This is a very important and a positive question. What is the point of the work that you're doing in your classrooms? What is the point of all of the labor and all of the one-shots and all of the conversations, all of the grading, if you have the misfortune to be doing a lot of grading? What is the point of that work, and who does it impact, and how does it change them? So now on to my actual presentation. Creative reflection, the critical practice of stepping back. So what I've just done is I've stepped back from my career in libraries in teaching and learning, and I tried to reflect on what my current practice is doing for the learners and the students and the constituents and the stakeholders that I'm currently serving. And that's what I want to help you do today and ask you to do today, is this process of stepping back from your day-to-day, your on the ground, your kind of boots on the ground practice, which can be so all-encompassing that it can be hard to really think about what's happening in the bigger picture. And I'm going to do this by speaking about what critical practice looks like. And again, this metaphor of stepping back from that day-to-day work and how grinding it can be at times. So I'm going to switch gears, and I'm going to talk about two people that I really like, that I think encourage us to step back and encourage us to think about what creative practice looks like in a world of ordinary objects and ordinary things. Does anybody know who Charles and Ray Eames are? We're in the Midwest, you should know. These are really amazing two people that I love very much. Again, I'll say it again. They also loved each other very much. There's this husband and wife designer duo who were extremely active in American industrial design, product design, and furniture design, actually, over, I'd say, between the decades of about 1940 through 1970. And they've had such a profound influence on the kind of built environment and the life that we lead, the things that we sit on, that you kind of wouldn't believe it. So this is an Eames chair. And it's one of the objects that they designed is very, very famous. The reason why I'm invoking these two people is that they also were really interested in helping translate scientific themes and concepts to a broader audience. They made educational films for children, which is a really interesting part of what they did. And I'm going to play a little video here. And this is where the main kind of stepping back and powers of 10 metaphor that I'm using over the course of the presentation comes from. And I thought this little flip book was very appropriate to our location today. I don't know if any of you have ever seen this Powers of 10 video or flipbook before, but what they do is they kind of zoom out to a point like way out in the universe and begin kind of drilling down closer and closer to the United States, closer and closer to kind of the ground level. And here we see ourselves in Chicago and getting closer and closer to this individual lying on a blanket. It's a really cool thing. And this process of stepping back and thinking about scale and perspective and ways of looking at things that kind of expand your mind and get you out of that everyday kind of grind is what I want to talk about over the course of the next hour. So I mentioned the critical importance of thinking about scale. What is the large scale impact of the work that we're doing as teaching librarians? What is the magnitude of the decisions that we're making as we create our lessons, as we create the different things that we're using to educate? And what's the perspective that we're bringing to the decisions that we're making? So Charles and Ray Eames described this process of stepping back and looking more deeply at ordinary objects as adding another zero. So throughout the presentation, I'm going to be encouraging you to add another zero to your practice, to step back, to get farther and farther away from what you're doing, to try to understand its holistic impact, to reflect on that holistic impact, and to use strategies to do so. So this beautiful object is called a cyanometer, and it was actually amazingly developed and created in the 18th century in order to kind of measure the color of the sky, which I just think is a really beautiful thing. And I want to use this as a metaphor for the heinous anxiety that I felt as a young teacher when I began the process of learning how to do the work of teaching and learning. So I was hired as a reference and instruction librarian right out of grad school, thankfully. Actually, it took me a while. Not right out of grad school, so after many job applications, I went to Ohio University, and I was a reference and instruction librarian there, and I had a really great group of colleagues, and I would teach in the classroom, and my students would be like, like asleep, and I would just like ramble and run on, and like wasn't active, and it wasn't interesting, and I knew this, and it was crushing, right? And so from that ground level, from that like white knuckle, I can only see my hands in front of my face level, my anxiety was super high, my anxiety was really dark, and my insight into what works in the classroom was very low. All I could feel was that kind of crippling anxiety kind of like crushing at me. But I started to step back to learn about learning, frankly, to learn about how people learn, why they learn, and what makes things work when you are engaged in the process of instruction. And the more that I did that, the greater my insight became, and the lower my anxiety became as a result. And by the time I'd stepped back to the level of educational theory, instructional design, my insight was much higher, and that feeling of anxiety of not having an impact in the classroom was much lower. And all that led me to write this book, which I'm actually involved in doing a second edition for right now, which is, by the way, like the hardest thing ever. I don't know if anyone's ever revised something fundamentally, but it's like pulling teeth, literally. But the book that I published in 2011 is Reflective Teaching, Effective Learning. And what it is a heuristic. It's a set of methodologies for dealing with the learning curve of becoming an educator who is confident and effective and able to have a true impact on the lives of your students in the classroom. And what this takes is a lot of thought, a lot of reflection, right? Dealing with one's own brain in creative ways. So sorry if this image grosses anyone out. It's going to be up there a lot. It's kind of gruesome, but it's what's in the top of your head. It's really important. So if we take this process of reflective practice, if we are able to step back and add another zero, if we're able to think about our teaching practice in different ways, in new ways, what does this look like? Well, this looks like reflective practice, which is an excellent, excellent, excellent set of strategies, very practical strategies for impacting the work that you do on the ground, impacting the program level of your instruction, and really making an impact on those students that are going through so many challenges in their educational lives. So, John Dewey. Who else has a crush on John Dewey? Only one person, oh my God. I can't believe, well, he's all mine. There we go. John Dewey, fabulous, very forward-thinking educational philosopher. Was very active around the beginning of the 20th century. And what John Dewey did and how visionary he was to really have the first articulated approach as an educational philosopher to the idea of active learning. So this was the era of like nuns with like rulers, right? So like rows of classrooms with desks bolted to the ground and students like wearing identical uniforms and just basically parroting back what people were barking at them, right? So John Dewey said, not so much. That's not actually the best way of going about educating. And he also talked about an educator's role in this kind of rigid, very like hollow response methodology of education. And John Dewey said, in order to change this mess, in order to fix this picture, we as educators have to move away from routine action and towards reflective action. He characterized routine action as impulse, tradition, and authority. Do we act on impulse without forethought? Are we simply following established traditions without correcting them or questioning them? And what's our relationship to authority in the classroom? Are we, again, simply doing what we've been told? Or are we taking the standards and the ideas that infuse our practice and really grappling with them and analyzing them? Dewey contrasted this to reflective action, which is obviously better because it's not red, it's blue. On the slide, little signal. Reflective action is characterized by wholeheartedness, so this embodied, like, heart-forward approach to teaching and learning. a sense of responsibility, understanding how much power you have to make a positive change and effect on people, and open-mindedness. And this is absolutely crucial to think about. When we change what we do in the classroom, it forces us to be open-minded. It forces us to have the courage to try things and mess up very badly, and then do them a little bit better the next time, hopefully. Unless you have like a huge amount of scar tissue, maybe you won't try that again. That's cool. Right. So if you want to learn more about this specifically, there's an article by Grant and Zeichner from 2001 that I'd really recommend. Dewey published a lot of stuff. And How We Think is his best book, I think, especially for people who are engaged in teaching. So How We Think by Dewey, and then an article by Grant and Zeichner that kind of summarizes all this good work by him in the area of reflective practice. So I promise I'm going to stop talking about John Dewey really soon. But I wanted to transition with a little quote of his that I think is very important. So, reflective practice emancipates us from merely impulsive and routine activity. Does that sound familiar, anyone? Routine, impulsive activity. And enables us to direct our actions with foresight and to plan according to ends in view of purposes which we are aware. That's really profound. It enables us to know what we are about when we act. So, that's a strategy. That's a strategic, outcomes-based approach to decision-making in the classroom. It's the brain again, y'all. So I'm going to approach reflective practice from 3 standpoints, and I'm going to give you examples on each of these standpoints and run through them one by one before I end this presentation. And I'm going to pose a couple of critical questions from each of these standpoints for you to mull over. So the 3 areas I'm going to go into for the remainder of the presentation are metacognition, mindfulness, and criticality. Each of these is a core tenet, a little stool leg, if you will, of the idea and the process of reflective practice. Metacognition, of course, is the process of thinking about thinking, which is really profound. It sounds simple, but if you think about it, as you think about it, metacognitively, it's really harder than it sounds, okay? So a couple of metacognitive questions that come to mind. As I make pedagogical decisions, am I guided by theory, instinct, and/or autopilot? Autopilot is a very powerful thing. I know that very well. Other question for metacognitive critical reflection. Can I identify evidence that people are learning as a result of my efforts? And I want to say that it's very important to get creative about what you count as evidence that people are learning. I'm not just talking about numbers here. I'm talking about level of engagement. I'm talking about how people are working with you in the classroom. Now thinking about mindfulness is the second kind of core tenet of reflective practice. If metacognition is thinking about thinking, mindfulness is not thinking about thinking. It's not thinking about much at all. It's feeling. It's being embodied. It's understanding the impact of what you're doing in the classroom, both on yourself and your own psyche and on other people who are participants in that classroom. Some of the reflective questions we can ask from a mindful perspective are, have I tried anything new lately? Was it successful? How did that make me feel? Or did it fail? And how did that make me feel? And importantly, have I considered why? Another important question that I always encourage people to think about, and this is a very central tenet of mindfulness, is working in community. What am I doing to facilitate a community of practice at my institution? How do you engage with your colleagues around teaching and learning? What kinds of collaborative work do you do together? Are you doing things like peer observation? Are you having critical conversations about the framework? About any number of things that are informing the work that you're doing. And the last tenet of reflective practice that I'm going to talk about is criticality, critical reflective practice. If mindfulness is not thinking about much at all, criticality is thinking about power and privilege and positionality and how information literacy dovetails so beautifully with ideas of justice and, frankly, injustice in our society. Critical questions, and these are my favorite. Are there political, cultural, and/or ethical elements of my practice that I should explore? What are you ignoring? Are you doing so by accident? Are you doing so on purpose? Why? Ask yourself these things. The more critical questioning you work into your teaching, the more engaged your students will be, I promise. You can sue me if it doesn't work, I swear. There is nothing more compelling, nothing more powerful in the classroom, and I'm banging on my computer right now, than asking students to grapple with the hard societal injustices and how information kind of adds to and absolutely exacerbates some of those issues. And from the flip side, what assumptions am I making about my learners? Do you know who is sitting in front of you? Do you know who's on the other side of the screen? Have you dug into who they are as humans? Have you dug into who they are, even in terms of demographics? Have you dug into the programs that they're taking, the progress that they have from point A to point Z over the course of their degrees? They're not just with you for an hour. They have a whole life outside of your classrooms. And it's critical to think about the pressures that are weighing down on them and maybe the assumptions that you're making about their readiness, about their disinterest or interest in the content that you're teaching. Okay, so that's a little introduction to mindfulness, metacognition, and criticality. So I'm a pretty practical person. What I'm going to do now is transition into examples of these things in action from my own experience as a teaching librarian. And I always like to speak from my own experience. I think it's a lot more interesting, a lot more easy to do than summarizing other people's experience. So I'm going to kind of run through each of these: metacognition, mindfulness, and criticality, calling out important programs that I've been involved with, and I think things that can translate to y'all's own on-the-ground practice. Y'all still with me? Yes, right on. Got a couple thumbs, that's good. All right, so metacognition. I'm going to give a little bitty mini lecture on what metacognition looks like, some of the theories that underpin this idea, but because it can be too easy to write it off as just thinking about thinking. That's, again, that's an oversimplified idea of what metacognition actually is. So according to Fauvel, thanks, I get parched up here. According to Fauvel, metacognition is any conscious cognitive or affective experiences, so cognitive or affective, that accompany and pertain to any intellectual enterprise. And believe you me, teaching is an intellectual enterprise. Fauvel further characterizes metacognition as consisting of knowledge, awareness of what one's own metacognitive abilities and strategies are, and experiences, right? So an example of a metacognitive experience is what's happening to me right now as I look around the room, kind of looking for fluttering eyelids, people who are like, no, in response to anything that I'm saying. So trying to understand my own reaction to an audience's kind of affect and kind of sense of presence. And these experiences and this metacognitive knowledge goes into the most important aspect of this piece of reflective practice, which is the idea of regulation. When we think about our thinking, when we think about the knowledge and the experiences that kind of feed into metacognitive work, we are able to change our actions. So regulation is being able to, on the ground, on the fly, shift what you're doing. Regulation of cognition has to do with planning, monitoring, and evaluation. In other words, everything that goes along with being a teacher, pedagogy. Planning, monitoring, and evaluation. Those are the three core things that I think go into the practice of teaching, the practice of assessing teaching, and the practice of changing what you're doing in response to that assessment. Information literacy skills are so core to the practice of metacognition, and this is something that you can work on with students, actually encouraging them to have this metacognitive approach to information literacy itself. IL is metacognitive. Interpretation, evaluation, reflection, criticism, justification, and revision of one's queries, of one's interaction with the content that we're generating. And there are so many implications for teaching practice when we think about metacognitive activity. Some simple things that you can do that are very powerful, and I speak from experience, to share your rationales for the decisions that you're making in your classrooms, in your physical and digital classrooms. So actually, we call it lifting the veil or pulling apart the curtain in immersion. We want to talk about why we're doing the things we're doing in the classroom. This helps humanize us as educators, and it helps give people a sense of kind of what the actions that we're taking are intended to do for students. Students want to know what you're up to and why. Highlight your own metacognitive processes. I plan to, I was thinking about. Explain the decisions that you're making, both to colleagues, to yourselves, and to the learners in your classrooms. And then encourage and create activities that foster metacognitive activity in the classroom. So on the planning side, implications for pedagogy when we talk about metacognitive practice are quite simple. Goal setting, creating outcomes, and different sorts of targets we're trying to hit. Planning and outlining, simple things around instructional design, and being able to justify the processes that we're taking. So the instructional design method that I developed for myself and then put in my book is called the user method of instructional design. Now, this is a kind of 4-part thing that's created specifically for teaching librarians because of the unique constraints that we have. Oftentimes, we are in very brief learning interactions. We're constrained by other people's syllabi, other people's ideas of what we should be teaching. And through these different steps, it can be a little bit more targeted and a little bit more practical as you're kind of working through the development and the execution of instruction. And a lot of times people are like, oh my God, Char, you gotta be kidding me. I don't have time for all that. And this is what my practice actually looks like, right? So I get it, I know, like this is real. This is actually what it's all about, right? And so what instructional design methodology does, and instructional design is inherently metacognitive, it is inherently thinking about practice, is that we all know that this is the implicit context of library instruction. We are freaked out. We underanalyze our learners. We focus on the stuff that we've done in the past because we don't have time to do anything else. We kind of brace ourselves. We enter the classroom. We become robots. We turn on autopilot. We get done and get out of there. And then we are suffused by a profound sense of relief and or regret. And we move on to the next class. So I get it, I know. But what this does is it helps us break that cycle. Even if you're able to think about instructional design methodology for a moment, for 20 minutes before a class that you've done 1,000 times, I can promise you that this will be somewhat diminished. And it also gives us a chance to say, all right, I know I'm really good at some things, and I know I'm not so great at others. And one thing that I encourage people to do as they employ instructional design methodology is to give themselves props for the things that they're already skilled at. Because this can give you confidence, it can give you kind of a sense of the things that you don't need to spend a lot of time on. We don't have a lot of time. So this is my own kind of little grid. I hate creating learning outcomes, I hate it. I'm sure you do too. But it can be so useful in focusing you and keeping you from spinning off in a million different directions, right? So there's free templates for the user method out there. You can find them on my SlideShare. This is a very short form one that can literally just help you jot down ideas on each of these kind of different phases of instructional design, from assessment to setting outcomes to actually engaging students in the classroom. So it's free, just go to SlideShare /Char booth, you can find them there. All right, so mini lecture on instructional design, done, check. So now I want to give some kind of practical examples of what metacognitive activity can do and what instructional design practice can help you do. So I want to kind of skip back a couple of years and talk about the Claremont colleges. So I worked at Claremont for about 5 years up until, oh my God, no, I can't even remember. Let's say 2016. And what the Claremont colleges, it's organized very strangely. It's 7 liberal arts colleges kind of wrapped around a library right in the middle. And each of the colleges is independent, unique, has their own majors, their own curriculum, their own set of faculty, their own institutional culture. And if you can imagine being one library teaching to each of those different schools at the same time, like as an environmental analysis librarian, I had 7 different groups of environmental analysis majors, 7 different colleges teaching those classes. And it was a really daunting practice. And what we needed to do was be able to focus and narrow down our own thinking about what information literacy meant and how we could engage and the extent to which we could engage in the classroom. And also to make the case for a more kind of streamlined and targeted approach to information literacy instruction. So we developed a set of critical habits of mind, we called it. So these are the tenets that we framed our program around. And we use these tenets, again, thinking about our practice writ large, thinking about kind of metacognitively about our whole program. And we use these to design assessments that asked our faculty, how well do your students' research and technological skills meet your expectations? So again, we're asking people to think about their context, think about their practice. And what we found at these very elite liberal arts colleges is that a lot of faculty felt that their students were not meeting their expectations. And they had a lot of gaps or kind of like deficiency areas in their information literacy skill sets. We then did something really tricky, which was, and I know there's a lot going on this slide, so remember slide share if you want to look really closely, but I'll summarize. We developed assessments that asked our faculty to report their students' levels of information literacy skills, and then asked our students the exact same questions from their own perspectives. And what we found, and you can see these little stars, those stars are not good. Faculty vastly reported much lower levels of information literacy skills than students did. Students thought they were doing great. Faculty thought they were doing not so great, right? So of course we all have our different perspectives, but asking people to think about their own skills and abilities and or the skills and abilities of the people that they're educating, I think was a very focusing activity and allowed us to make the case that your students actually think that you're doing the things that you think you're doing in the classroom much less than you are. So we asked students, how often do your faculty emphasize these principles in their work, using peer-reviewed or scholarly sources in assignments? Students thought that their faculty were doing that at a factor of 10 times less than faculty thought they were. Just fascinating, right? So with this evidence, with this body of evidence, asking students or teachers to faculty to think about their teaching, students to think about their learning, we were able to create a different approach to instruction and assessment, really paring down all the kind of random subject-based stuff that we were doing and focus in on those key pivotal moments in a student's academic career in which information literacy skills could be better taught and better assessed. And so we ran this kind of rubric-based assessment program in the first year instruction program that we did across all the colleges. And we found that based on this advocacy and increased intervention in the classroom at this first year that we had done by demonstrating to faculty that the students thought they were way better than the faculty thought they were, that librarian intervention in the classroom vastly improved students' scores on this information literacy rubric of these papers that they were putting out there. And so the rubric is also available if people want to see this and adapt it and use it, please do. It stands the test of time. It's been used by a lot of different institutions. You can just Google Claremont College's information literacy rubric and you'll find a bunch of different PDF versions of it. It's great for capstone level work. It's great for first and second year level work. And the three core areas of assessment in this rubric are attribution, evaluation of sources, and communication of evidence. So once we were able to demonstrate that librarian intervention in the classroom around these key deficiency areas that our faculty had identified, we made the case. Librarians do matter in your classroom, and this was an excellent advocacy tool. And something that we really made the case that if you think about the skill set that your students are bringing to the table, and students, if you think about the skill set that your faculty are bringing to the table, librarians have this kind of pivotal point in between those two and can help norm and equalize those skill sets and those habits. All right, so that was metacognition. Moving on to one of my personal fave knowledge areas, mindfulness. How many people would consider themselves practitioners of mindfulness in this room? Excellent. More than lovers of John Dewey. I think that's probably a really positive sign for everyone's well-being. I'm serious about that. Right, so mindfulness, of course, is a lot of things. It's a practice of meditation. It's a practice of reflection on one's body, on one's kind of affect and ability to understand what's happening inside of ourselves and inside of our minds as we work and as we go through our daily lives. So it's a sense of awareness, basic attention to what's going on. And what I think is interesting for teachers to think about when they think about mindfulness and teaching practice as one of those core tenets of reflective practice itself is it's a joining of one's affect and one's intellect. So affective, of course, being the emotional kind of things that we embody, the affect that we bring, and kind of the spirit and personality we bring to our teaching. And the intellect being the work side of it, right? So again, the boots on the ground part. And another theorist that I'm super in love with, and I hope other people are as well, is Bell Hooks. And Bell Hooks, as a practitioner and a proponent of feminist pedagogy, is a big fan of mindfulness practice. And what Bell Hooks says in Teaching to Transgress from 1994, must read, by the way, is that teachers must be actively committed to a process of self-actualization that promotes their own well-being if they are to teach in a manner that empowers students. And I want to call this out because I think it's so easy to lose track of our own well-being in work and in libraries where so many of our resources are being squished and constrained, and we're in hard times. So many of us are in hard times that we forget about taking care of ourselves. And we forget about making decisions about what we do that actually affirm and lead to our own self-actualization. Self-actualization being the process that makes us full human beings. And if you're not a full human being, you cannot teach well. You can try, you can get pretty far, but something's missing. And mindfulness is what helps us in the moment, in the action and the practice of teaching and outside of the classroom as well, understand what it takes to take care of ourselves as educators. Because the work we do is hard, right? Yes. So mindful pedagogy is actually a thing. It has a lot of similarities to metacognitive pedagogy and critical pedagogy, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. But at its basis, at its most basic, mindful pedagogy is conscious of power and privilege, so conscious of classroom dynamics that can be really important. Like you typically as a teacher are kind of a figurehead, you're a facilitator, a lot of attention is on you. How can you disperse and give some of that attention and focus back to your students? Mindful pedagogy is also empathetic. Again, this whole time I've been talking about library as ally. Library as being able to be empathetic with the full experience that students kind of are bringing to the table, the things that are happening outside of the classroom. Another thing about mindful pedagogy that I find very interesting is that it does mean that you have to be more comfortable with uncertainty, right? So the process of developing comfort with uncertainty, the uncertainty of teaching and learning, which is just absolutely, never going to change, is that you're better able to kind of handle what comes at you and be present in the moment when something goes wrong. And finally, conscious of your own capacity. We can't do more than we're capable of doing. We can't teach more than we are capable of teaching. And being able to push back and advocate for a scalable, feasible kind of load of classes. And being able to push back and say, like, no, actually, this will be more robust, this will be stronger if we do a little bit less of that. That's what I mean by capacity. So a lot of things can go into the practice of mindful pedagogy, a couple of practical ideas. Creating a teaching philosophy, creating metaphors for your own instruction. These are aspirational, right? The process of writing out a teaching philosophy can be a little weird, can feel a little strange, but it's something that you can come back and anchor yourself to. Like, my ideal aspect and execution of instruction is this. I want to embody these qualities as an educator. And you can remind yourself of what those things are on difficult days. You can also do peer and self-evaluation. So observation. I'm going to talk about this in a little bit more detail later. But these are excellent programs to kind of expand your horizons in teaching and get feedback from your very smart colleagues. You can also, frankly, emulate people who are good at stuff. This is really simple. It's not stealing if you give attribution. And it's a mark of respect. So watch your colleagues do what they do. Come to conferences like this. Gather ideas from the breakout sessions later. And emulate the effective with attribution. Always give people their props. And finally, having an embodied presence. We are physical beings, and learning how to center yourself as you're in the act of teaching is like a really wonderful thing to do. It makes you more resonant with the people who are engaged in a learning interaction with you. And this is more complicated, obviously, than giving 10 seconds to it really can do anything to do, but meditation is one thing that can really help you feel embodied as you go through this practice of teaching and learning. All right, so I'm going to talk now about failing badly. So being comfortable with uncertainty and trying new things in the classroom often leads to this kind of situation, right? A total crash, a pratfall. And in my own practice, I would basically fixate on these moments, right? Does this resonate with anyone? Like you only remember the bad stuff. And when the bad stuff happens, it kind of obliterates all the good stuff. And it makes you forget all of your kind of effective points. And so what I started trying to do, and what I encourage people to do, both in consultations and in the book, is to stop thinking about those bad things and to develop actual frameworks to begin to think about the more positive things that happen. So shifting from, oh my God, that was terrible, to, wow, there was actually some really good points of that learning interaction that I can also call out. And around, my God, almost 10 years ago now, I started doing this little exercise that I call a 3-question reflection. That is one of the simplest things that any teacher can do after any learning interaction of any kind. I mean, I could do it after this presentation, is to basically sit down and ask yourself 3 questions. What worked about what I just did? What didn't work so well? Articulate these things clearly, and then something I should follow up on. So I don't know about y'all, but every time I ever taught, there was just some little thing that went a little wrong, or some little kind of aspect of what I was doing that just like practically, like this microphone didn't work, or this like clicker was busted, and the adrenaline of instruction would kind of wipe all that away the second that the class ended. And so when I started doing this, I noticed that I was better able to cultivate confidence in some of the more effective practices, and then have a more practical orientation to saying, yeah, that wasn't actually the greatest thing I've ever done in my life, and here's some strategies for what I could do to change that. And then maybe I don't want to trip over that cord every single time I walk into that room. I'm going to follow up with the tech folks to get that fixed. So if you do these little 3-question reflections systematically every single time that you teach, you will start to find that you're building a new kind of knowledge bank and a new practice bank. And here's another thing that you can find for free on SlideShare. This is really simple. You don't even need a template. What worked, what bombed, something you need to follow up on. And of all the activities that I've ever done or developed around the idea of reflective practice, this is the one that has brought me the most confidence as an educator and been the most practical in application. All right, so I want to add another 0 to that. That's a very personal, kind of like individualized perspective on what mindful pedagogy looks like. And bring in another example that I mentioned earlier that also has a lot to do with metacognitive practice. And that is peer observation. How many people are engaged in some form of peer observation in your current institution? Excellent. Usually the hands don't go up. So the beauty of peer observation is that it does cultivate local communities of practice. And the importance of local communities of practice are that when we don't teach in isolation, when we teach in solidarity with other people, it can do nothing but enrich the work that we do. And at the Claremont colleges, our instruction program, or peer observation program, had a lot of different kind of facets to it. But it had a kind of personal reflective part where we had an instructional awareness checklist that each person would kind of do, and this is adapted from learning materials that were created in the ACRL Information Literacy Immersion program. So part of the peer observation program is to think about what one's own teaching practice looks like, literally, from the other side. What do you do with your hands? Where do you move? How do you handle transitions? How do you begin and end class? And the other side, and this is going to look a little bit daunting, was actually having a person come into the classroom, sit down at the back, and after a conversation about parameters and about like kind of a safe zone or a safe space for observation, focus on one particular area of one's teaching. Clarity of presentation, presentation techniques, learner engagement, organization of content. So the person would sit down, observe, write plus delta, so this is not super critical feedback, but it's important constructive criticism. And then write comments, go out to coffee, talk about it. And even after a few times of doing this, people would find that those they were observing were giving them ideas. So even more than the other way around. So the act of observing other people teaching really gave a lot more fodder than people would imagine. We would always set ground rules for observation so that it was a safe space for people who didn't feel they were being evaluated. This had nothing to do with people's job performance. It was all just kind of a neutral, safe space for observation. And we always found a very good return on our assessments of the peer observation program, and found that people really did feel that it enriched their own practice. All right, y'all. It's time to move on to critical reflective practice. This is my fave. So I mentioned earlier that criticality is this process of a thoughtful, challenging examination of things like structures of dominance, injustice, how information literacy can be used to counterbalance those forces. Here's another one of my awesome boyfriends, Paulo Freire. He's a great guy. And Paulo Freire, in his amazing seminal work, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, another must-read, in my opinion, tells us that knowledge emerges only through invention and reinvention. Through the restless, impatient, continuing, hopeful inquiry human beings pursue in the world, and with each other. So I think that threshold concepts have a lot of resonance with ideas that Paulo Freire talks about in Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Threshold concepts, of course, being the underlying framework of the ACRL framework for information literacy, which I'm going to talk about a little bit now. So threshold concepts are transformative, irreversible, integrative, bounded, and troublesome. Criticality, critical reflective practice in information literacy instruction should be troublesome. It should be challenging. And one of the framework frames that I want to call out is the idea of information having value, and also authority being constructed and contextual. So I think this is a really profound idea, and one that in my own critical practice as an educator, I've tried to kind of twist around and make very interesting to students. So the idea of authority is very charged, and I wanted to twist this around in the Claremont colleges to being access is constructed and contextual. So the reason I did this is because we had a lot of really elite privileged students, and I wanted them to understand, and my colleagues wanted them to understand, that their level of current access to information resources was really profound, and that when they were done with their education, it would evaporate, right? So what were their responsibilities in the moment to understanding this frame or this idea of access being constructed and contextual, and how could they give that privilege back? And the core idea that I think can connect information literacy educators to this idea of critical reflective practice as one of the tenets of reflective practice is information privilege, right? So this idea that, again, elite students, any student associated with an institution of higher learning has this incredible amount of wealth of information at their fingertips that is based on their institutional affiliation and isn't available to other people. So adding another zero to that, how does this translate to practice? Programmatically, how does this translate to instruction? Well, information privilege is like a magical bullet to engage students in the classroom. And here's how I did it. I would go into a room with my little seminar class, and I would write on the board like $6 million. And students would be like, what's that? And I draw a big black box around it and shade it in. They're like, well, students, this is how much of your tuition money we use to pay for journal articles. And students would be like, what? I thought they're all in line. I'm like, nope. There's these big corporations, these massive publishers that have this incredible monopoly on knowledge production. So your professors, they write stuff for free, they send it to the journal, they review it for free, and then you pay for it. And by the end of these conversations, students would be like, my God, like, how is this possible? It's so unjust. It's so messed up. Yes, it is. And you are the holders of all of that privilege. So what are we going to do about it? Incredibly engaging. It's kind of a catalyst for action among students. And the way that we'd like to do this at Claremont, and a lot of people are doing really great work with Wikipedia editing and information literacy instruction, was to actually ask students to write well-researched tertiary articles using all of this amazing source material that they had access to, preferably open content, to substantiate these important topics that weren't yet covered in Wikipedia. So for years, I worked with this wonderful class called, this was like an intro to American politics at Pomona College. And we would divide the class into groups of 5. This is a semester-long ARC project that was students' culminating project for the semester. And we would lead them through, a really intensive experience of being able to write in tertiary voice, research an article like until you don't want to ever see that topic ever again in your life, and coming up with these incredibly well-documented encyclopedia articles in Wikipedia. And invariably, students really appreciated this iterative process of going back and forth and drafting and being able to use source materials to create these really beautiful, again, hundreds of citations in some of these things. And these are not necessarily like the sexiest topics in the history of the world. I mean, it's Federalist Papers and things like that. But the idea and the understanding that all of this research and all of this source material was being fed back into public discourse as a way to counter and challenge information privilege was extraordinarily engaging to students. And they all did little presentations at the end of the semester. They actually were not little, they were quite big. And every single student would always call out how many page views their article was getting, which I love. Because there's this whole critical pedagogy concept of the banking model of higher education, where open up the student's head, stuff all this stuff in, and then close it up and like sew the head up, and it just stays in there forever. But the problem with that model is that the student doesn't get to give anything back, and the articles and the assignments that they turn in just kind of end up in the recycling bin, or whatever kind of metaphor you want to use for that. But in this critical approach, using information privilege as a foundation, students understood that this work they were putting out into the public sphere had a broader impact than those articles that were getting thrown, in the wastebasket. So some of the products of this assignment were really profoundly well used and kind of edited a lot, and students always found that very engaging. So if anyone hasn't experimented with Wikipedia in information literacy education, I would highly encourage you to do so. It is very robustly supported by the WikiEdu Foundation. There's a lot of people who work for the WikiEdu Foundation that can help you figure out ideas for putting this into practice in classrooms. All right, y'all, we're entering the home stretch, and I'm really excited about some Q&A in a few minutes. So I've gone over metacognition as an idea of thinking about one's own teaching practice. Mindfulness, being conscious of your own well-being in instruction, and being conscious of how you bring your affect, how you bring yourself to your classrooms. And criticality, how are you analyzing and kind of pulling apart and asking difficult questions and asking your students to grapple with difficult questions about information literacy. Those 3 things have, from the perspective of pulling back and thinking about adding different zeros, and this process of stepping back away from your on-the-ground practice, are what I constitute or consider to be reflective practice. And I again want to thank Charles and Ray Eames for all of their contributions and encouraging us to, again and again, have that interesting perspective that is larger than ourselves, bigger than ourselves, drilling down, stepping back. And hearkening back to the core conference themes that we're dealing with today, and what all of these and I'm really glad to be able to see some of the breakout sessions, these core principles of curiosity, creativity, and action. Creativity must be accompanied by reflective practice. There is no creativity without reflection. There is no action without reflection. And there is no motivation for reflective practice without a sense of curiosity around one's own effectiveness and one's own students, and how those students can be better served by your efforts. So, the hardest question of all is, what is the point of all of this work we're doing? And this is a question I really encourage you to ask yourselves. Dig deep, because if you don't have a good answer to this question after every single learning interaction, there is probably something you need to change. And I know this is really Pollyanna. I'm a real big Pollyanna fan. But what is the point of your work, and how can it be more meaningful? And that's my presentation. Thank you. That was super fun. So talk to me. I guess we've got some microphones somewhere.
If anyone has a question, just raise your hand. Troy and I will come around and give you the mic so we can get it recorded for our streaming live.
Questions, thoughts, reflections? Yes, hi. Can you please say your name and I'll, oh, we've got a runner. That's awesome. Thank you.
So my name is Kate Gansky, and I'm from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for your presentation.
Sure.
And since obviously you do everything with intentionality, I wondered if you could speak to your decision to fuzzy all of your images.
Oh yeah, totally. Okay, so I'm a very aesthetic individual. Like I love imagery. And there's this technique that I use using Adobe Flash that kind of overlays this beautiful blurring, and it's called tracing a bitmap. And so I've used this for a really long time because I simply think it makes images look more attractive. And it also kind of transforms images to the level that they become a little bit more personal. So I don't like to just take other people's stuff and use it without, you know what I mean, without kind of like making it my own. So all the images that you see in this presentation were either taken by me or transformed using this kind of rastering technique. So, and if I don't have visually stimulating presentations, I'm not into it, you know what I mean? So that's kind of the thinking behind that design technique. So now everybody knows my secret. Other thoughts or questions? Hello. This is a question from the far side.
My name is Devin Savage. I'm here at Illinois Institute of Technology, and I really like this idea of information privilege and connecting the student and their access to actual action and connection to the community. I think that's going to really resonate on a lot of campuses. I was wondering if you knew of any other examples of action or any other work that's like this is done sort of intentionally.
Well, okay, so one thing I want to call out is the dual volume handbook of, I think it's critical information literacy or critical information pedagogy. It's like choose 3 of those words and mix them around. It's it's edited by Nicole Pagowski, and what I think is really important about that volume is that it has both a handbook of techniques in volume 2 and a theoretical approach in volume 1 that give you literally dozens of examples of using information privilege and critical information literacy concepts in application. So more than any one institution or individual that I want to call out, I would like to call out that work as being absolutely essential reading. And it's been collected by a lot of libraries, so you don't have to buy the thing. Sorry, Nicole. And yeah, so that volume I think is the richest possible source of other practical applications of ideas of information privilege. Yeah. There's also a recent College and Research Libraries News article by Sarah Hare, I believe. Her name is someone I recently met. So yes, I believe it's CNRL News or just College and Research Libraries. If you search for CNRL and then information privilege, that'll come up. And I believe that one had a focus on scholarly communications and information privilege, which has a lot of excellent applications in IL classrooms as well. Other questions or thoughts? Hello.
Hello. So I'm Patty Hurley from North Park here
Hi.
in Chicago.
Excellent.
And my question's more like, how do you articulate the what is the point outside of your bubble? Like your personal bubble, but also like the library can become a bubble. And how do you articulate that when you're engaging faculty? Because sometimes you are in their space.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to make it your space.
Sure.
To be able to go through those steps.
That's an excellent question. And I think I don't want to say manipulation, but what I'm going to say might sound like manipulation. So I think that being skillful at understanding that party's motivations is the key to making the point of what you're doing. So from a disciplinary standpoint, what is the disciplinary background of that faculty member that you're working with? And how can you actually play to the strengths of that positionality and that perspective to make the point of what you are doing to help their students become more active and skillful? So while it's not exactly manipulation, what I'm talking about is understanding the perspective of the bubble that you're in and being able to use that perspective and the motivators from that perspective to make that good point. Because just speaking from our own standpoint is not going to resonate because people don't share the same ideals and values that we do implicitly, right? So having that kind of skillful, I'm just going to say skillful communication, I'm not going to say manipulation. Having that skillful approach to understanding other groups' motivations, and if you're talking to an administrator, you probably want to look at the bigger vision of the university, its own kind of like strategic initiatives and goals, tying what you're doing to those strategic initiatives and goals. Now that I'm an administrator, I really see why administrators have that focus on the institutional mandate. It's because that's what we're supposed to do. I mean, we have to be thinking about that I'm not going to say bottom line, I hate that phrase, but that underlying core importance of what makes the institution run. So when you're speaking to administrators, going big vision, talking about signature programs, talking about how the library or the work that you're doing in the classroom really resonates with those signature pathways and how the work you're doing, it contributes to student success writ large. Like, we love that, you know what I mean? So yeah, just manipulate your administrators and you'll be great. Yes.
Hi, thanks
Hi.
so much for your talk. My name is Valerie Harris, and I work at the University of Illinois Chicago Library.
Awesome.
I'm in special collections.
Cool.
And I really love the idea of having administrators that come with that information literacy, teaching background. And so because now you have this administrative power, how are you transforming the sort of information literacy services in your library, and also where do you think it needs to go sort of across the board?
Sure, and that's a great question. I am blessed to be in an institution that has an extraordinarily effective IL program already. So what this means is that I actually don't have a lot of contributions for them. I'm focused on the core stuff that I need to do, which is making sure that we are devoting our institutional resources towards those basic needs, kind of challenges that our students are facing. And I know this isn't probably the answer that you expected, but what I can do as an administrator is to make sure that those resources are being funneled to those signature programs that we're doing, making sure we have enough teaching librarians, making sure that things like the Common Read and the exhibits are getting as much institutional oomph as they can, and helping to advocate for all of that good work and all of the good impact of that work to my colleagues, to my peers in the institution. So, I mean, so much of the work of an administrator is around kind of institutional resources, and that can be really boring. But at the same time, when you think about it from this standpoint of what is our library doing in an ally role for our students, well, everything that we do in the classroom is oriented towards that ally role, and therefore we have to respect and resource that stuff. You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, if we didn't have such a strong information literacy program, my answer might be a little bit different. But what I can do is value and elevate and empower that, and sing the praises of my awesome colleagues. Questions? We got a hand front and center.
My name is Delaney Bollinger. I'm a graduate student at the University of Illinois.
Yay! That's awesome. Love library students.
My question is about, so I'm about to graduate and go on to another university, and I'm wondering what are some strategies that you know for kind of acclimating yourself to the campus culture and learning what that is?
That is such a good question. Well, listen. I think that it's so important to learn people, to learn structures, to learn culture. And the way you do that is not to like bust down the door and just like fling all the crazy ideas you've got and like, you know, just it's so important to learn what's already being done, to learn and affirm the contributions of your colleagues that you'll meet, both inside the library and outside of the library. And I think if there's ever been any missteps that I've made in my career, it's not taking that time to truly understand and embed yourself in the existing institutional culture before you start trying to change things, or start trying to do things in a way that you consider to be different from the current practice without showing that respect for the practice. And another thing, this totally applies outside of the library. And I hope that where you're going, you have the support to get engaged in campus events, campus organizations, campus committees. There's really no better way to begin as a new professional, meeting people and making those kind of like good, productive, interesting connections than to volunteer for service opportunities within the institution. And again, I'm not going to call it a privilege, but some places are better at enabling that and empowering you to do that than others. And I just really hope that you end up at a place, and any other library students here end up in a place that sees the value of librarian service outside of the library institution. Let's see, other strategies. Yeah, so listening sounds like a trite answer, but it's just so important to value the people that have been there before you and to value the programs that they've already worked on, because there's nothing more alienating than a new person coming in and like poo-pooing your work. So, yeah. Other questions? Awesome.
Hi, my name is Rachel. I'm from the Evergreen Park Library. My question is, you've talked a lot about stepping back and seeing the bigger picture, both for the instructor and for the students. What would you do or recommend someone do if they're at a school where there's a student or even a group of students that are rather closed-minded, maybe even bigoted, and they're trying to undercut what the school is doing to empower all of their students?
Oh man. This is going to be my last question, I think, just based on time, and what a question that is. Wow. Okay. So every institution, I don't even mean higher ed, I mean every institution in this nation, in this world, is polarized now. And it's funny, actually next week, I'm going to give this talk at an initiative that my school has called the Civility Campaign. And what this is it's like a organization and kind of an effort to call out the importance of civil discourse between people with opposing viewpoints. And I think that in this polarized time and this gnarly of a discourse context, that it's almost imperative for us to develop these formal contexts to have civil discourse between unlike-minded groups or kind of advocacy areas. And I say that because it is so easy to fall back on anger when one's position is challenged. So without a formal container to facilitate that kind of more positive interaction and respectful interaction between groups, without that kind of project existing on a campus or in a different institution, that our discourse devolves into a lot of fighting and yelling and falling back on half-truths. And also, if it's a serious hate group situation, you don't give it oxygen. You know what I mean? Like there's civil discourse, and then there is absolutely wasting your time and giving oxygen to a pernicious and evil set of ideals. And I think that is not the way to go, if that makes sense. So calling out hate speech and moving on to better speech, I think is essential. Does that kind of answer your question? Yeah. So if other campuses have civility campaigns, I think it's a wonderful thing, because it does allow for the organization of positive events and kind of ways to say like, yeah, we totally disagree, and that's okay. And we can bring that kind of like okayness to the process of polarization rather than the kind of hollering out on the quad that can so often happen. So I think I've got okay. So y'all, this has been really fun. Thank you very much. I'll see you around the breakout sessions. I appreciate it. All right.
So I'm Jen Schwartz. I'm from DePaul. I'm here one of the co-sponsors of this event. I want to take this opportunity to really thank our keynote speaker, Char.
They gave me a present. That's so awesome.
Thank you for giving us so much to think about and take back with us. We're on practice at writing frantic notes during this keynote address, thinking about what we can do for social justice, making the time for reflective practice in our own teaching so that we can break bad routines and be more inspiring with our students. Personally, I'm going to go back immediately with this 3QR practice. I'm going to use that with my next instruction session. I'm very excited to do that, so thank you for that. And yes, and just thank you again, a small token of our appreciation.
That's awesome. Thank you all. Give money to SPLC. Thanks.